Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. My guest today is investigative journalist Robbyn Swan, and together with Robbyn today, we'll talk about the new evidence about 9/11 that emerged in the last few weeks. Robbyn is also the co-author of one of the most complete books about 9/11, what happened, the Saudi involvement, what went wrong, and things of the sort. Therefore, this will be the argument of today's discussion. Thanks for your time, Robbyn. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Leonardo. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've heard great things about your program and even managed to catch a few of them myself. I'm happy to be on the show. It's a great chance to talk about our work. Our book, The 11th Day, The Truth Story of 9/11, came out about 10 years ago, but we continue to work on the case and have been developing all sorts of new leads, particularly to do with the potential Saudi involvement in the conspiracy.
Yeah, you're also one of the authors and the editors-in-chief of the Florida Bulldog, who was one of the very few media outlets who's still dealing with 9/11, and one of the other ones would be me, actually. So before we start, would you like to tell us something about who you are? Because you investigated so many cases during your career that I definitely think it's mentioning what your background is.
Sure, thanks. Look, the Florida Bulldog is edited and founded by a very good friend of mine, Dan Christensen. We brought Dan into the 9/11 story back in 2008 when we were working on our book, and he has very much made it his own. He is perhaps, along with yourself, one of the few people, and perhaps Adam Fitzgerald, covering 9/11 regularly. Dan does it almost every day. He follows the ongoing civil litigation against the kingdom that's been ongoing since 2002. And really, I'm very proud to continue to be able to publish in that venue because it's one of the few places you can get breaking news about this case out. Anthony and I am married to my co-author of many years. We've been married for more than 30 years. We've written about everything from Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe and J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon to the Kennedy assassination, the disappearance of the little British toddler Madeleine McCann, Pearl Harbor, and of course 9/11. And we bring, I hope, discipline and passion to all of those projects, and we work bloody hard at them.
Well, a few weeks ago, you reported on the Florida Bulldog that the house in which two of the hijackers that would have hijacked plane American Airlines 77, who would have crashed into the Pentagon, received many phone calls from a Saudi prince. That happened in a specific time slot. It never happened before and never happened after that. Based on a declassified FBI document, what does this add to the picture? Because what we've been discussing so far is that this guy were getting assistance from a guy by the name of Omar al-Bayoumi. This changes pretty much everything because now I think it's getting clearer and clearer that they also had a connection with the Saudi government, since they also had this phone calls with this Saudi prince. So what do you think that this detail that you reported about adds to the picture?
I think we should separate your question into a couple of parts. Let's talk first about what I discovered. Back in 2021, President Biden ordered the release of thousands of pages of previously classified FBI documents. So what I'm telling you is not coming from, things I picked up on the internet. These are government reports, interviews, surveillance documents that had been held by the FBI as part of Operation Encore, which was a follow-up investigation to the original Pent Bomb 9/11 investigation. And the bits and pieces that emerge are that in 2006, the FBI, while investigating a material witness in the case, decided to go back finally and look at videotape from Los Angeles airport security. And in that videotape, they discovered that there seemed to be three unidentified men who appeared to be traveling or at least accompanying future hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khaled al-Mihdhar through airport security. This led to a very long investigation by the FBI, multiple years. And during the course of that investigation, they did another thing that they had not previously done. They went back and examined the telephone records belonging to the house where Mihdhar and Hazmi had been staying in the months right after they arrived in the US. That house had been owned by a longtime FBI informant named Abdussattar Shaikh. And Dr. Shaikh, who has, I believe, I'm told, has subsequently died, was never thoroughly vetted by any of the previous 9/11 probes. He was handled with kid gloves. The FBI insisted upon that because Dr. Shaikh was a longtime FBI informant. So we're not actually sure why Dr. Sheikh's phone records were not looked at. Was it because he had claimed the hijackers had never used his phone? Or was it simply because he was a trusted informant, so the records weren't thoroughly vetted? In 2006, when the FBI did look at them, they discovered some phone calls that connected to the hijackers, not to Dr. Shaikh. And among them, they believed, were calls that came in exactly the period that Hazmi Mihdhar traveled to Los Angeles and go through LAX and have these unidentified men accompanying them. These unidentified phone calls from the two Saudi princes then become of great interest to the FBI because they deduce, look, no phone calls before that, no phone calls after, phone calls at exactly this time. Bingo, light bulb. I wonder if these two things are relevant to one another. They came to believe, they had four scenarios they laid out. One was that someone who had been using the prince's phones was in touch with Hazmi and Mihdhar. One was that perhaps the princes themselves had been in touch with Hazmi and Mihdhar. One was that the brother of the prince whose phone was being used had been in touch with Hazmi and Mihdhar. And one was that they just couldn't explain it, that maybe it was not Hazmi and Mihdhar, but perhaps Shaikh that the princes had been reaching out to. So you have all these possibilities. And the two princes in question are young men attending college in the Los Angeles area. They are apparently only distantly related to the current royal family. I believe the FBI identified one of them as 56th in line to the throne, which makes them rather poor princes in Saudi terms. My contacts who study the Saudi royal family extensively haven't yet been able to pin down where exactly in the family tree they fall, but it is a very tantalizing new lead. Who are these princes in contact with? Are they in contact with Hazmi and Mihdhar? And if so, why? Is it one of their associates who's in touch with Hazmi and Mihdhar? And if so, why? Or is it again this mysterious FBI informant, Dr. Shaikh, who is in touch with these two Saudi princes? And if so, why? And why at this time? And unfortunately, we are left in the position of not knowing the answers to those questions because the FBI was never able to get access to those princes from the Saudi government and report on what those two men claimed about their role. So there is a hole. There is another hole in the investigation of 9/11, and that hole happens to be in the shape of these two young Saudi princes.
Well, what is interesting is that on the same day, something big happened too. Well, your reporting was big as well. But on the same day, 60 Minutes aired a video that shows this Omar al-Bayoumi guy, who's a Saudi agent who was providing logistical help to these two hijackers that you mentioned while they were staying in California. And this guy was shooting videos and pictures in Washington, D.C. of the U.S. Capitol and other landmarks. This has been in the hands of the investigators for more than 20 years so far, because it was found in his home in the United Kingdom right after 9/11. What took so long to make these videos public? Is anybody still trying to shield Saudi Arabia from facing their responsibilities?
Again, Leonardo, I'll break that down into a couple of segments. As far as I know, parts of that Bayoumi casing video, now this is a separate video. We're not talking about the same video, obviously. Bayoumi is a man who has long been in the focus of investigators as a possible Saudi intelligence officer. FBI releases suggest that he was, in fact, a Saudi intelligence asset. And why he was filming the Capitol is a fascinating question. It appears that it can only be a casing video. It doesn't look like a tourist video. It was found, or at least parts of it were found amongst possessions of his that the Metropolitan Police and their counterterrorism officers confiscated from Bayoumi's apartment when he was arrested after 9/11 in the UK. Now, what we know about that material is that some of it at least was handed over to the FBI, and they did not adequately go through it. We know that some of it, including notebooks and various other bits and pieces, were found in an unsorted box of materials in about 2000, and again, the same time frame, 2007 going on 2010, at the headquarters sort of repository for such materials in Washington. It was found by one of the men working on Operation Encore. Now, I know that some of that material was in that box. I don't know if all of the tape we have seen was in that box. It is my understanding that some of the videotape evidence that is now emerging has been very carefully and painstakingly put back together by investigators and the legal teams working on the current Saudi litigation against the kingdom. So exactly what we're seeing and how much of it was held where and when, it's still a little unclear to me. I would like to, it's something that needs to be sorted out and traced back to its actual, so that we can get actual dates on it. As to, is anyone still hiding and trying to protect the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Well, there is something that seems to me evidently going on about possible involvement of named individual Saudis and their contacts with the hijackers and their contacts with the plotters. One of your a guest I think you've had in the past, who I speak to about some of this stuff sometimes, Miles Cara, who did the other inquiries section of the joint inquiry investigation. He was on that team. We kick these ideas around in the way of people who care about this case. And what he and I often come back to is the idea that proving individuals were involved, proving that those individuals worked for the Saudi government, isn't necessarily proving that the Saudi government writ large as an institution had foreknowledge of the attacks. So we have to always be extremely careful about what we're saying. Who knew? What was, in what capacity did they know? What was it in their capacity, in their official capacity as employees of the Saudi government that they came upon this knowledge? How large was the information disseminated if they found out? So there are still things we don't know, and we should be very careful as as responsible reporters to cast our net too widely. I know that's we're getting into wide-ranging conspiracy here, and you always have to be extremely careful when you do that. I've covered enough conspiracies in my life to know one thing is true, and it goes down to something that Carlos Marcello is credited with saying. The American mafiosi Carlos Marcello is credited with saying two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. And what he meant by that was that, it's really hard to keep control of a wide-ranging conspiracy. So, we have to be careful. So I'm still waiting for all the evidence to emerge.
But let me add another piece to this thing that you're saying, because I used to think till like 1 month ago that we didn't know whether Omar al-Bayoumi knew what the two hijackers were planning. But now, after seeing him shooting videos of the US Capitol and talking about a plan and discussing about how far those landmarks were from the two airports of Washington, D.C., I find it hard to believe that he didn't know what they were planning. What are your thoughts about this?
Again, I have sometimes I think I have more questions than answers. If the surveillance video in question was taken for the 9/11 hijackers, why was it still sitting with Bayoumi's belongings after 9/11? What we know about the targeting issue is that KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has claimed that they were talking about targeting important US landmarks way back, 1996 at least, okay? Possibly prior to that. He claimed that when he first envisioned using planes as weapons, he had already started thinking in terms of major US landmarks. But we know that at a targeting meeting in Afghanistan in 1996, that bin Laden and Mohammed Atef and KSM were talking about specific US landmarks and targets. However, so that puts this 1998, 1999 casing trip by Bayoumi within the frame. But we also know is that soon after that 1996 meeting, some al-Qaeda operatives actually went to the US, did some casing operations, the Statue of Liberty, the Twin Towers, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Sears Tower in Chicago, a couple of other things. And that all went back to bin Laden. And we have it because it was found, after 9/11. So where exactly this piece of Bayoumi evidence fits into the overall picture of intelligence gathering by al-Qaeda, we don't know. And so that's another thing we need to try to pin down. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. It's also within the realm of possibility that the United States had other enemies out there who would have been interested in this kind of information. So we need to, hone in on what we know and fit it into the overall picture.
Well, but Omar al-Bayoumi was no lone wolf, because in that video we're discussing, he was together with two Saudi diplomats. Does this mean that also, the government was tasking al-Bayoumi with helping the planners or the hijackers somehow?
Yeah, again,
complex.
What we think we know about Bayoumi now is that, according to the FBI, back when the 9/11 Commission reported, what we thought about Bayoumi was largely speculative. But in 2016, 2017, the FBI concluded in sort of a 2-sentence document that Bayoumi was a paid asset of the Saudi General Intelligence Presidency, or it's got various names in English. They're sometimes called the GIP, sometimes the GID. The Saudi's Foreign Intelligence Section, being paid directly by Prince Bandar. That is what the FBI document says. But it doesn't tell us how the FBI knows that. Doesn't tell us how they, the specifics. How much per month, what he was supposed to be doing, how long it went on. We are very lacking in specifics. We also appear to know from the documentary evidence that, as you say, this wasn't the only time that Bayoumi appeared to be helping Saudi officials move around the US and acting as a sort of facilitator for some rather unsavory fundamentalist characters. And in the 9/11 litigation that's currently ongoing, they seem to have unearthed in FBI documents a sort of uh, a modus operandi, if you will, of Bayoumi Fahd Thumari, another a consular employee, an employee of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs in Los Angeles, working together to help radical Islamist Saudis move around the U.S. for whatever purpose. And again, we have to try to understand what they were up to. Who was a watcher? Who were the watched? Who were participants? Who was perhaps taken in? And we're not there yet. We're trying. Believe me, I'm trying. But we're not there yet. Apologies for my email flashing over the screen.
No problem. Nothing happened.
I think in a proper world, there'd be a follow-on 9/11 investigation where we address these questions, an official investigation. I know that some members of the 9/11 Commission felt that they had been assured that there would be a follow-up investigation of the Saudi role, that it wasn't over yet, and that never happened.
Well, what strikes me about this video of Omar al-Bayoumi in DC is that we see him clearly in his face. Because before that, we only had pictures or another video in which he was throwing a party for the two hijackers, but it was not visible, or at least not that clear. How could he be so dumb, so, I don't know, risk-prone to do something like that? Because now you and I would be able to recognize him if we were meeting him down the streets. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of Bayoumi's sort of personality was that of the sort of garrulous and gormless. The 9/11 commissioners who interviewed him didn't think he had the personality to be an intelligence agent. And so maybe he is a bit like that. Maybe he is a bit sort of, a bit not unsophisticated. Maybe he wanted the attention. Maybe he wanted to be credited with doing this by people in the terrorist, infrastructure. Maybe he just felt that because, this is what he did. I mean, he apparently always had his video camera out, was always doing these videos. Maybe he just thought people would just assume it was another Bayoumi video and no big deal. So we don't really know. I mean, look, the hijackers pulled off an amazing feat. They, this bifurcated, complex attack, and they did it on the day. They did what they had to do, and they did it extremely carefully, and they managed that. They thwarted the U.S. air defenses, but they also made a lot of mistakes. Speeding tickets, Hazmi's name in the phone book, Hazmi going to the police about some trivial matter. So none of this was flawless, and still they managed to effect the most devastating attack on the United States ever.
Well, let's get to the most difficult question ever. Why did they do it? Because so far, I've came across three possible explanations, one of which is that actually these guys were trying to recruit the hijackers as informants because they were Saudi agents, and they at the end underrated the threat because, let's face it, al-Bayoumi was probably or is probably not too smart. The second option would be that somehow the Saudi government had to give something to the terrorists to prevent them from striking in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or even trying to overthrow the kingdom. And the third option can be that probably al-Qaeda infiltrated somehow the Saudi government. And these three options can also overlap. So bottom line, why did they do it, in your opinion?
I'm going to do one of those terrible things that authors always do. I'm going to say, I'd like you to wait and read my book,
Sure.
because that subject is at the heart of a forthcoming book that Anthony and I are working on now. All three possibilities that you suggest are being explored by us, as are other possibilities. And I think there is reason, there is possible justification for all of them. The one thing that I would say here is, when we talk about our government or agents or people hiding things from us, I always like to take a very, very careful line on that, because when you and I think rightly criticize whether it's the 9/11 Commission for unfinished work, whether it's FBI for unfinished business, whether it's the CIA for failing to pass on information or missed opportunities, whenever we're criticizing an agency writ large or individuals within that agency, I think we always have to remember that those agencies and those commissions are people by and large, dedicated, patriotic, intelligent professionals who are honestly trying to do their job. And I wouldn't want ever to sweep up the whole lot of those people in an accusation that I couldn't justify. The FBI people I talk to, the CIA people I talk to, the NSA people I talk to, they're good people. And I think we have to take our time, and we have to find the right answers to what happened. We owe it to the victims. We owe it to the survivors to get to the bottom of this. We owe it to the people. The war on terror as we know it. I apologize. It's a bit warm where I am. The war on terror as we know it was predicated on the idea that this non-state actor, al-Qaeda, perpetrated this attack. That shaped our response to it, as the American response to the attack. If that is not accurate, because in fact there was a major state player involved, then we need to know that. And we need to perhaps, in areas, rethink how we deal with that kind of issue. And certainly at a time when Saudi Arabia remains absolutely pivotal to US foreign policy, we need to be thinking hard about its possible role, or the role of members of its government or royal family in these attacks. I saw a headline earlier today that an incoming President Trump would never disown or never disavow Saudi Arabia. We have to be sure about who our allies are, who are our friends in the world, and how much can we rely on them. And we cannot just proceed apace if new intelligence emerges that convinces us that this alleged ally has behaved in a perfidious way. And that goes not just for Saudi Arabia, but for any of our allies.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that this is the biggest problem ever, that no one wants to embarrass the Saudis, because so far they are meaning the West, because I'm not American, of course, our allies. But I also I totally agree with you saying that the CIA officers and the FBI officers I've spoken to are good people on both sides. So we should not find culprits in this case other than al-Qaeda or maybe the Saudis, but the patriotic investigators, as you call them, did their job. And we also have to remember that investigators have to succeed every time they do something, while terrorists only need to have success once. So absolutely, let's give them credit because they deserve it. Well, as you mentioned at the beginning of this discussion we are seeing a lot of new documents being released because of a work order signed by President Biden 3 years ago. Do you think that there's an acceleration in trying to clarify things about the Saudi roles? Because I think that in the last few years, a lot of evidence have come to the surface, and this is definitely positive.
I think there is new evidence. Sadly, I don't think it's led by government will. I think it's been led very much from the front by the victims of 9/11 and by their lawyers, pushing, and pushing for those releases. I've been involved in some of that. We pushed for the release of the 28 pages. We worked with Senator Graham on that, a champion of getting out the facts on 9/11, an absolute loss to the 9/11 community to have lost him this year. The Biden releases are very much the product of pressure brought by the families. And now what we're seeing is this week in a New York courtroom, we, by which I mean Anthony and I and the Bulldog, joined with the New York Times and CBS and ProPublica in a motion to have documents in the ongoing civil suit unsealed under the First Amendment. The plaintiffs have been pushing for that, to get these documents into the public domain so that the American people and the world at large can know the truth about 9/11. These are documents that lawyers fighting for the families have not even been able to share with those victims and their families. So the real victims of 9/11 have not been able to see the totality of the evidence amassed against particular Saudi government officials and witnesses, and that we definitely need to continue to push for. And we are pushing for it. And hopefully the court will see fit to release as much of that as possible in the coming weeks.
Well, Robbyn, before we close this video, when is your book coming out? Because I definitely recommend my viewers to read it.
Thank you. It's with our agents in New York now. We're hoping that in the next 2 years it will be able to finish it. There's a lot of work yet to do. This has been a passion project of ours since our first book came out, and we will go on until we get to a reasonable point where we feel we can offer the American people some conclusions about the evidence that has emerged. But at the moment, with all those documents I'm talking about still withheld, we've got a long way to go.
We have a long way to go. Yes, totally. I know. Let's keep researching 9/11. Well, Robbyn, thanks for your time. I think that your explanation were very precise, and also that your reflections were very important. And I hope that this reasoning of yours sink in the minds of who's watching this video, because that's definitely the best and fairest approach to this complex case.
Thanks, Leonardo. I really appreciate the chance to talk to your audience.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.